Right now, someone, somewhere in the world, is taking a sip of alcohol. Maybe it's a beer. Maybe it's a glass of wine. It seems like a completely normal part of modern life. But what if I told you that every drink is connected to a story that began long before cities existed, long before farming, and possibly before civilization itself? Think about that for a second, because alcohol isn't just a drink. It's not just something people use to celebrate, relax, or unwind after a long day. It might be one of the reasons civilization exists at all. And the evidence for that story goes back thousands of years. Most people think of alcohol as a drink people use to celebrate, relax, or forget about a stressful week. But what if alcohol played a much bigger role in human history than we realize? What if the story of civilization is actually connected to a drink? Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is opening a bottle of beer, pouring a glass of wine, or raising a drink with friends. It's such a normal part of modern life that we rarely stop to think about where it all began. But the deeper archaeologists dig into the past, the stranger the story becomes. Because evidence suggests humans were drinking alcohol thousands of years before cities existed, and possibly before agriculture became widespread. To understand how extraordinary that is, imagine the world 13,000 years ago. There were no roads, no governments, no supermarkets, and no permanent homes. Humans survived as hunter-gatherers. Every day was a search for food, water, and safety. Life was unpredictable and often dangerous. Yet despite those challenges, ancient people were already experimenting with fermentation. In a cave near present-day Israel, archaeologists discovered traces of grains that had been crushed, soaked, and fermented inside stone mortars. The evidence points to a primitive beer-like drink created by people who weren't even farmers. Think about that for a second. These people had not yet developed agriculture, but they were already spending valuable time and resources making alcohol. Why would hunter-gatherers, whose survival depended on finding enough food, bother creating a fermented drink? That's the question that has fascinated researchers for years. The answer may begin much earlier than anyone expected. Long before humans learned how to brew alcohol, nature was already doing it. When fruit falls from a tree and sits in the sun, natural yeast begins feeding on the sugars inside it. As fermentation starts, small amounts of alcohol are produced. This process happens naturally all over the world. Ancient animals encountered fermented fruit regularly, and so did our distant ancestors. Imagine walking through a forest thousands of years ago and finding a piece of sweet, overripe fruit. You eat it and later notice that you feel slightly different, more relaxed, maybe even happier. You don't know why, but you remember the experience. Over thousands of generations, humans became familiar with fermented foods and fruits. Eventually, someone discovered that fermentation could be encouraged and repeated. That realization changed everything. For decades, historians believed that farming came first and alcohol came later. The traditional story was simple. Humans learned agriculture, settled into villages, and eventually discovered brewing. But modern archaeological discoveries have challenged that idea. Evidence now suggests alcohol may have appeared before organized farming became common. If that's true, then alcohol wasn't a product of civilization. It was present during civilization's earliest stages. One of the most fascinating examples comes from Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Built more than 11,000 years ago, it contains enormous stone pillars carved with animals and symbols. Some of these stones weigh several tons. The site is older than Stonehenge and thousands of years older than the Egyptian pyramids. What's truly remarkable is that it was built by hunter-gatherers. For years, archaeologists struggled to explain why people without cities, governments, or advanced technology would organize such an enormous construction project. Moving and carving giant stones required planning, cooperation, and labor on a massive scale. Why would they do it? One theory is that Göbekli Tepe served as a gathering place where different groups came together for ceremonies, feasts, and celebrations. Researchers have found evidence suggesting fermented grain drinks may have been consumed there. If that's true, alcohol wasn't just a beverage, It may have been part of the social glue that brought communities together. Imagine hundreds of people traveling across the landscape to gather, share food, exchange ideas, and drink together. Those gatherings may have helped create stronger social bonds, larger communities, and eventually more complex societies. Some researchers have even proposed a controversial theory. The desire for alcohol may have encouraged the development of farming. Now, no serious archaeologist claims beer alone created civilization. Human history is far more complicated than that. But consider the logic. If a community enjoyed grain-based alcoholic drinks, relying on wild grains would be unreliable. Growing crops, however, provides consistency. A reliable supply of grain could support larger gatherings and more regular production of fermented drinks. In that sense, alcohol may have been one of several motivations pushing humans toward agriculture. And once farming appeared, everything changed. Permanent settlements grew larger, populations increased, trade expanded, civilizations emerged. Throughout that transformation, alcohol remained part of human life. As centuries passed, brewing techniques became increasingly sophisticated. By around 7000 BCE, people in ancient China were producing fermented beverages made from rice, honey, and fruit. Later, civilizations across the world developed their own brewing and winemaking traditions. In Mesopotamia, beer became an important part of daily life. In Greece and Rome, wine played a central cultural role. In ancient Egypt, beer was consumed by workers, families, and religious communities. What's remarkable is that alcohol appears again and again throughout human history, across cultures that had little or no contact with one another. Different societies discovered fermentation independently and embraced it in their own ways. That pattern suggests alcohol fulfilled something deeply human, not merely a desire for intoxication, but a desire for connection. Humans gather, celebrate, tell stories, build relationships, and create communities. Throughout history, alcohol often became part of those experiences. So when did ancient humans start drinking alcohol? The truth is that we'll probably never know the exact moment. The origins are lost deep in prehistory. What we do know is that humans were intentionally producing alcoholic drinks at least 13,000 years ago, and the roots of that relationship may stretch much further back. The story of alcohol isn't really the story of a drink, it's the story of curiosity, experimentation, and human connection. It's the story of people discovering something unusual and deciding to explore it further. That same curiosity led humans to invent tools, build monuments, cross oceans, and eventually create the modern world. And somehow, through all those changes, alcohol remained part of the journey. Empires rose and fell. Languages disappeared. Entire civilizations vanished into history, yet the tradition survived. The next time you see a glass of beer or wine, remember that you're looking at more than a beverage. You're looking at a tradition that may have accompanied humanity through some of its most important transformations. And if some archaeologists are right, you're also looking at something that may have helped shape civilization itself.